Welcome guys, today I'm going to be showing you how to push to Azure a Angular 14 .NET 6 web app. This web app also has a SQL database attached to it, so I'm going to have to create all three things in Azure, so the Angular 14 client, the .NET 6 API, and the SQL Server SQL database instance. The project I'm going to be using for this is from this video right here. There should be a card that pops up and the thumbnail image, which is where I created this Angular 14 .NET 6 app, and I showed you guys how to do that and also talked through some of the Angular 14 big updates. So if you have not seen that video and want to, there should be a card that pops up here, and go check that out and then come back to this. But if you have a project with a similar structure, or you're just curious how to push a similar project to Azure, well then stick through. And we're going to dive into how to do it next. All right, guys, now that we're at the code here, you can see I already have the API running and I have the front end running as well. Just want to quickly show you guys kind of the local version of it. So the local version is going to just kind of look like this. So we just have, two soccer players. This is the front end. And then this is the API with the get players, post, put, and then this delete method. These are the only four. That's all we have in the database. All we have is this one table called player. And if we edit it, we see we have two. You can see that we have 1 and 4 as player IDs because we've created and deleted and done edits already. So that's why the player IDs. That's why there's no 2 and 3. But now how do we do this and move it all to Azure? So let's go ahead and start with that. I'm going to first stop these from running. And now the first thing we're going to have to do is I want to go ahead and create the resource group, and then I want to start creating the web app for the API, and then from then we can move on to doing the SQL server before we push the API. Why? Because once we create our SQL server and our SQL database, we're going to need that connection string in our project before we publish. So I'm going to go ahead and create a resource group, not here. Resource group, create. I'm just going to use my Azure subscription. We're just going to call this RG1, South Central, review and create. So our resource group is created. Now I'm going to go ahead and create my web apps. So we're going to go create web app down here. Now this is going to be the API first. So API first, that means that I'm going to do this soccer player API, since that's the name kind of this project, the soccer player API. So that's the back end, and I want to specifically say that this web app right here is for the API, not the front end. So we're going to do the code. We're going to select .NET 6 as the runtime. It's going to do Windows Central. I'm going to change. So this is where you set your plan and memory and all that stuff. I'm going to set the free. So if you just want to test, you can go down here and just say the shared. It's just free. But obviously, if you have like a real world project, then you mess around with this stuff. But I'm just gonna go with the free version because I do not want to get charged for this tutorial. And then we're just gonna review and create because I don't need any of the other stuff. And now let's create. And it'll take a few seconds, and then we'll come back. So as we can see here, the soccer player API was created. So we have this web app, but it is currently empty. We have not actually pushed any code here. But the next thing I want to do before we move into publishing the API, doing any of that, is I want to create our SQL database, our SQL server instance in Azure so that we can have something for this API to, connect to. We don't obviously want it connecting to like our local database. That would make no sense. We would want to make a SQL database, SQL server instance in the cloud, and let's go ahead and create that. So we're going to go to SQL databases over here. We are going to create a new one. I'm going to select my resource group, and then I believe if I don't have a server to create, I'm going to have to create a new one. So my database is just going to be sample database, since that's just kind of what I called it over here. We're just going to do that, nothing too fancy. And then we're going to have to create a new SQL server. So you press that create new, and then creates database instance. So our server name, I'm just going to call it soccer player YouTube server. It has to be all lowercase, no hyphens, and then you select your region. I want to use I think SQL authentication is fine. I'm not going to do too much. I'm just going to do a server admin login, and then this is your password right here. Once you have that, press OK. And remember those credentials because you're going to have to use them in this next step coming up. So once you have this, you're going to see your server pops up here. I don't really need Elastic Pool right now. I don't need anything super fancy here. I do kind of want to go for this basic because I am just doing a tutorial again. I don't need all the space, but if you need the space and you can calculate that, then, you know, those are the service tiers for you. I'm just going to do the basic because I do not want to get charged. And then I don't really need a lot of different types of backups. This is basically just if obviously there's like a failure at where these servers are housed, then you could switch to like another backup that is stored somewhere else in the country or somewhere else in the world. And you can always have a database available so it doesn't go down if there's like a natural disaster or something. But right now I don't need anything fancy. We're just going to create this. Okay, so now that our database is created, the next step that we want to do is we want to get the connection strings to actually go and create our tables on this database through SSMS. And then we also want to get the connection string and put it in the API so that when we publish it, it'll publish with the, production connection string. So we go here, and this is going to be the actual connection string. As you can see, it's going to put in that username for the SQL authentication that we used. And then right here, it has this like bracket, your password. So when you put this in the API, you're just then going to fill this in with your password. So I'm going to copy this and just go ahead and go back to my project. So you see we have this default connection. I'm going to go to my app settings. I already made this prod connection right here. You kind of just paste this in here. And once you do that, all you have to do at that point is fill in your password right here. I'm not going to do that on this because I don't want you guys to see a password that I use. But that's all you guys have to do. And then all you do is you then take this, go back to your program, and replace it here. And that's all you have to do to then get your prod connection going. And then for whenever we publish in just a second. So now that I have my connection string set up in the API, now I actually want to connect to this database in SSMS and actually create and script the tables in. So I'm going to need this piece right here from the TCP to right here. I'm going to go SSMS. I already have, these are my local tables. So like I was talking about, this is the table that I need to create. So I'm going to connect. We are going to throw this in here. Don't need this. So then this is the Azure SQL Server instance that we are trying to connect to. And then we're going to switch to SQL Server authentication. And we're going to put in the credentials that we signed up with. And if you want easier connection, you kind of remember this password. It will keep tabs on like other connections that you have. So you won't need to always be putting all of that in. I'm just going to connect to this. It's going to ask to sign in with your Microsoft Azure. So whatever account that you use to connect to your Azure, you're just going to sign in. It'll autofill and you add this. And it's basically just to allow you to actually connect to that Azure instance. We're going to see that the sample database was already created, but we have no tables. Once it expands, you're going to see there's no tables. So what are we going to have to do? We're going to have to create this table over here. Yeah, see, no tables. So how am I going to do that very fast? You're just going to right click, script table as a create to. Open a new query editor. It's going to generate the script. So this is the script you need to create that database or to create that table. And the reason I kind of just left it the same name is just because it's just going to use blah, 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 whatever database. It just makes it quicker. So what I'm going to do is now right click the Azure database. I'm going to do a new query. And then I'm just going to grab this query and throw it over here. And then I'm just going to execute it. Boom. Now I refresh this. And we now have our player table here. If I look at the design, you're going to see that we have the exact same setup as we did on the other one. This is going to take a little bit because it is connecting to a newly created table in Azure. As you can see, the design is exactly the same as if I click this one. They are both exactly the same. Let me put them side by side. Exactly the same. So you don't have to set up anything if you already have the table set up here. You just script it quickly and then you just kind of move on. I will not have any entries though. Let me close all of these. I will not have any entries in the database. So to just quickly have at least one entry so that whenever I actually connect everything in Azure, since I immediately call get all players, we'll have an entry and we'll know if our table is working or not. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create Neymar really fast. 10. Cool. So we have one instance in this table already. So our database is set up now with the table, everything we're going to need for the API. So that is set up now. So now let's move on to publishing the API to Azure and getting all that working. Okay, so now that we have our SQL Server all set up, now let's move on to actually pushing our API to Azure. So there's a few ways you can go about doing this. If you go to your project in Visual Studio, you right click it, you click publish. You're going to see that it's going to bring this up, and then you are going to have a few different options. You can use ISS, you can use FTP, you can just go straight through kind of the Azure way. The way I like to do it, so I have a little bit more like personal control, or just the way I like to do it, as I like to use a publishing profile. So how do you get a publishing profile? Go back to Azure. You're going to click this get published profile right here. This is going to come with all the settings that you need to push here. And this is just the way that I like to do it, and it's just very simple. So where did it go? Close this window. I just like putting it on my desktop. So we're gonna see that our settings are right here. So now what do I need to do? I need to go back to my project, add a publish profile. I'm gonna click this import. Now I'm gonna browse. I'm gonna find it on my desktop. Yes, you're gonna see that I have video games. So this is my publishing settings. Now I want to finish. It's going to create everything that it's going to need based off these downloaded settings. And you're going to see that it has everything just right here. So basically it is ready to publish now. So I'm going to see my prod connection set up correctly. It kind of just gets everything. It already knows where it's going, and you don't have to set anything up. It just autofills, and this is kind of why I like it. And I have control, and it's like set up in Visual Studio now, where I can just automatically just keep pushing there if I need to. So now let's actually just publish. That's what we're going to need to do. Okay, so as you guys can see, the API published successfully. Obviously, we don't have views on this, so that's why there's nothing here. But if we go back here, it says publish succeeded. You can kind of look at the output if you need to, if anything went wrong, but everything says it's published correctly. So now what I want to do to test, does my API work? Does my SQL database work? I want to use my Azure front end, or I want to use my Angular front end, and I want to connect and try and hit the Azure API, hit the SQL database in Azure, make sure that connection works before pushing the client side up. So how do we do this? Well, now that we have this, we're going to need to go back to Azure. We're going to need the connection string or the URL for the API. So that is going to be right here. So we're just going to copy this. Now I'm going to go back to my Angular project. So I'm inside the Soccer Player API client app right in here. So we're going to go to our environment. And as you see in our environment.ts, just for like local, you see that this was the API URL that we were hitting. So now we basically want to grab that, and I'm going to have to recopy. But so here we're going to do this, and now we go back, copy this again, and then paste over this part, because now this will be the new endpoint that we're going to need. And then to actually run this locally with the production environment kind of flag, what you're going to need to do is you're going to do ng serve, and then you're going to do -- configuration, and then you're going to type production. This is going to execute this file. Let me find it. So in this angular.json, you're going to see your configuration script right here. And when you do production, it's going to replace environment.ts with your environment.prod.ts. So that's how you're going to be able to run this locally, not obviously with the production, but here locally. And then whenever you're actually going to push, you're just going to do a build with this configuration, and then you're going to push that disk file up. So locally, let's just run this so that we can get it running locally with the, production URL. Obviously, it says don't use it for production. Okay, our Angular project has built now with that same production environment. So we're going to open it in localhost, and we're going to see that nothing's coming up. Nothing's coming up. Why is that? Let's inspect. Let's go into the backend. We're going to see that we have 3 errors. So we're going to see that the origin localhost 4 4,200 has been blocked by CORS policy. I know if you guys remember, and if you watched the other video, you guys saw me add here in the program that we're allowing this origin. So while this does work here, Azure also has its own CORS policy. So we're going to have to go into Azure and make sure and allow localhost 4,200 to be able to do this in Azure. So because it's obviously going to block like the same JavaScript settings, the same thing that it was doing here locally, we're also going to have to do that in Azure. So it's very easy to set that up. Let's go there. Once we're in the API, we scroll down here to CORS, and then all we have to do is we can actually just grab this, throw this here, get rid of that slash, and then now boom, we should have localhost done. So this should allow this origin to hit the API for the purpose of testing. So now let's just empty cache and refresh. And we're still getting an error. So now what is this error? I go to my network. It still has not finished executing. Okay. So now we're seeing we're having a 500 internal server error. So these can be a little tricky if you don't know the right place to look. But we are getting this error. So something inside the API is now the problem. It's not blocking my client. My request is going through now. Something inside the API. So this is where it can get kind of tricky if you don't know where to look. So let's figure out if we can figure out what error this 500 actually means. And to do this, I want to go back to my API. We're going to scroll back to the overview. And let me see if I can find, I'm looking for the application insights because I want to be able to see, let me see, application insights. Yes, so now I've made it to my application insights. So if you didn't see what I clicked, application insights down here, view data. And now we're here. So once you get to your application insights, you're going to see that you have some failed requests. And you should be able to click in here and see what the actual error is going on. In my case, I actually do know what the error is. For some reason, this was working for me yesterday. I do not know why the error code is not popping up correctly for these failures. Because as you can see, it does correctly say that there was failures. I do not know why they're not appearing here. But when you have these errors, it should pop up with the response codes. And if you click in them, it will show you what the actual error is. In this case, when you create a SQL server, there is a firewall between your API and your SQL server. And if you don't tell it, allow this origin or this IP address through, then it will block it. So to fix this error, which it should tell you here, so I hopefully when you guys do it, it does show you, because it was showing me last night. And I don't know why it's not doing it now, but it should. You just need to make a firewall policy to allow your API's IP address to go through. So now let's go do that and fix that so that we can actually make the full connection from our local client all the way through the Azure API and then the Azure database. So let's go to the sample database. We are going to set server firewall. And now we are just going to need to add a firewall rule. So I'm just going to say soccer player API. And now we just need the API address or the IP address for the API. So I'm going to go back to the API. And where is the IP address? That is what I'm going to need to find. And when I find it, I'll be right back. Okay, so I finally found the IP address. You just scroll down to custom domains and you should see your IP address right here. You're going to take that. You're not going to go back to here. Put it in both. Okay, and now you just save. Now we should be able to successfully refresh the localhost and it should connect all the way through and actually pull that one row of information that we have that is Neymar right out of the database. So let's go back to our client. Let's refresh. And as you can see, it is now fully connecting. So our localhost is able to hit our API, and then our API is able to go to our Azure DB and actually get that one row of information. So now let's actually put the Angular project in Azure. And if you guys remember, whenever we publish our Angular app to Azure, Azure is going to give us a new URL. So we're actually going to have to put that in the API and in Azure so that we can make that connection without CORS also blocking us on that. So keep that in mind. But now let's move on to how to push the Angular part to Azure, and let's make that full connection now. Okay, so now that we have our API and our SQL database all set up, Now let's actually push our Angular side, our client side. Let's actually push that out to Azure as well, so we can have that full connection. So we're going to go back to our resource group. We're going to create another web app. Same stuff. And now we're going to call this soccer player client. That's not how you spell client. And now select the runtime stack. I'm going to select node 14. Windows should be fine. And now Central US. And then the free infrastructure, I'm going to use it again. And now let's review and create. And I'll be right back when it's done. Okay, so our deployment is complete. We're going to go to the resource. We see that we got this new URL right here. So since I mentioned earlier that cores would block another origin that's not in the thing, let's go and actually add that to cores. So I'm back at the API. This is not the API. App services, API. So I'm back at the API. We're going to go to cores, and I'm actually going to just add that URL and save. So now we should have the client side actually working. So now that we have this, let me just refresh this. Okay, so now that we have our client set up, we have the URL of the client in cores for the API, so that doesn't get blocked. Now let's actually push the front end to Azure. So the first thing you're going to need to do is you are going to need to download the Azure plugin. So you will need to get the Azure plugin for this. So if you go, I believe, and go to extensions, and then go download the Azure App Service. So you're going to need this plugin. You're going to need this plugin. Once you install it, it's going to be right here. And it's going to allow you, once you sign in, to see all your subscriptions. So as you guys can see, you're going to see that I have my API here and my client. So we're going to want to push to this. But I suggest first you do an ng build configuration equal production. That'll allow the production URL, which is actually going to be this, to be created for that dist folder. So we're going to run that really quick. Okay, so now that that is done and we have that, now we can go to our client and deploy the web app. So you're not going to want to push this because this is going to push every single file in here. We only want to push that dist folder. So you click browse, you go to your API, we're going to go to the client app inside the dist, and we're going to pick this client app folder, which is the dist folder with the application in it, and we're going to select. Are you sure you want to push? Yes, you want to deploy. You can click to always deploy that folder, but you never know, so just leave it. And now let's deploy it, and I'll be back once it's deployed. So as you can see right behind my image, let me close myself. It says that it's been deployed successfully. So now let's go check it out. Let's check out the client now. So now, boom, I opened it, and immediately it gives me that it's running. It immediately sends this back to me. And if we look at the network, let me refresh this. Look at the network. You can see that it is hitting Soccer Player Client Azure API. And you can see that the request API is coming from Soccer Player API /API players.get. And that is coming straight from all the way back here from the Azure. So now we have our Angular client in Azure. We have our API in Azure. And we have our SQL Server instance in Azure as well. And if we want to just check out that all the other stuff works, let's do this. And let's refresh our changes. Jersey 11. Let's add a player. Base 7. Create. And this was the same issue that I had with my front end not refreshing. But right there, boom, we have it. We can go back here and we can refresh our table. We can just select our top 1,000 rows. And we're going to see that everything was created successfully. Our edit was successful. And now if we delete, it should also be successful. Boom. So everything's working. This is running in Azure. The API is in Azure. The database is in Azure. If you enjoyed this video and found it useful, please drop a like and subscribe so you don't miss any of the other wonderful content. And maybe you're a developer and you're still learning and growing, or you're just curious. Well, this video right here will tell you 10 things that I think are very important for every single developer to know.